Welcome to Board Game Impact. My name is Bruce Brown, and what we do here at Board Game Impact is combine our passion for board games along with our education so that way we can break down gaming experiences for your gaming group and your benefit. So if it sounds like something interesting for you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click that like, and do share this as well. Today what we've got is an amazing game that I think you're going to really enjoy. It was a highlight of a convention recently for me, and so I had to get my hands on it, and that game is Tiny Towns by Alderac Entertainment Group, or better known as AEG, and designed by Peter McPherson. Tiny Towns is a game about 45 minutes. I've honestly played it as fast as like 25 to 30 minutes. And it's for 1 to 6 players. That's right. You can actually play this game as a 1-player game or up to 6, and it's going to be really cool. But it is recommended for ages 14 and up. There's no real anything that would prohibit a younger person from playing this. The reason is because essentially in this game you're going to be essentially unlocking a puzzle, and you're going to be designing a puzzle and going through that experience. Some of the puzzle and the depth that can be there probably for some older kids, but you can probably deviate with that age group if knowing your kids. But that being said, let's find out what's going on with Tiny Towns. So I mentioned that I wanted to get my hands on this game since attending a convention. So I was at Board Game Geek Spring, which took place in Dallas in May over Memorial Day weekend. Phenomenal convention. Highly recommend you go if you can. Tiny Towns. There was a couple copies in the library of games, which had about 6,000 games in it. That's right, 6,000 games. So you get to access to all of those games while you're at the convention. Tiny Towns is a game that was on the top of the list. It had just come out, and every time I went to try and check it out, because you're going to see here in a second, the components look really cool. When I saw it on tables, like, I want to try that. Every time I went to check it out, I couldn't. I ended up having to sit with somebody who I saw playing it, who I also knew from the convention, and just essentially walked with them back to the library, and immediately I checked it out once they checked it in. And there was actually a good number of people doing that. But the gameplay is really short, and so nobody really minded that because it was essentially just passing from gamer group to gamer group the whole time. So we got the box lid for Tiny Towns, and inside we have an equally sized rule book. The rules are actually pretty straightforward on this, but the art on it is part of why this is so big, because they want to show off everything in the box. And there's a lot actually going on here, but it's all very simple. So we've got the rule book, which outlines the different resources, the different cards, the player setup, as well as what ends the game. So if you notice, the actual only rules are like here, and the same thing on here, but that's just the setup. And so the rules are actually pretty short. Now, the majority of this book is actually talking about all the different cards in the game. Don't get worried about this. You're not going to use them all in the game. So what else we have in here? We've got score pads for the end of the game. We've got player mats, so every player is going to get one of these. And then we have a couple decks of cards, which, let me grab my knife real quick. We've got a couple decks of cards. These are tarot size cards, which is always really nice. Much easier to hold them in your hands, also have them on display. And so the core game of this is going to be around these cards. I'm going to explain how they all play out here in a second, because first you now need to see these. So you got this big old deck of tarot cards that relate to these things. I'm going to move the box out of the way so you can see this a little better. And so in here we have got a couple things. One, resource cubes. So we've got glass, wheat, brick, stone, several other resources, and so they're just represented in these cubes. Then we have this really cool first player token, which is a little hammer. And the reason it's a little hammer is because this player actually gets to initiate the building. And so what they're going to be doing when you have this, you can claim a resource, and everyone at the table, let's say you pick wheat. Everyone gets a wheat, and then they put it someplace on their board. Where you place it, where I place it, might be different. And what's really cool about this is I can actually narrate a play with me video, and so stay tuned to the channel to check that out. If you have a copy of Tiny Towns, we can play along together, but I will be drawing resources randomly. So stay tuned to that. Make sure to click subscribe so that we get notified, as well as a little bell icon. Okay, so what else is in here though is pretty sweet. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different little buildings. Now these range in complexity from essentially a farmhouse with a little silo on the side to a very simple representation of essentially a little hexagon that can be used as a well. We've also got little church-style buildings with a steeple. We've got little houses or cottages that are really cool with a cute little smokestack as well as a little door. We've also got a bigger building, sometimes used as a factory, and I'm going to explain how all these come out, don't worry. And then second to last, we've also got this little cool one, which looks very much like a fantasy style house with a couple stories added on. It almost looks like Howl's Moving Castle to me from Studio Ghibli. And then finally we've got what's called monuments. Essentially it's just a tower. So now why I wanted to show these off before showing all these cards off is because, oh, look at all the pretty backs. Because these are sorted into different decks. So remember that little hexagon one? Well, we've got 4 cards that can represent that hexagon, whether it be the well, the fountain, the millstone, or a shed. And so what you're going to be doing, if you notice all these take the same resources on this one. So if we were to take the well, then if I have these 2 resources anywhere on my board, so if I have a stone and a wood, or a wood and a stone, yes, you can flip them, that's completely fine, or vertical, then what happens is on my turn, we're just going to leave it. On my turn, I can then consolidate those 2 resources, and let's say they were right here, and place down a well in that spot. Now what's going to be happening is once you have a structure in that spot, you can no longer put a resource cube in that spot. And so the more buildings you build, the more full your board's going to be, which is going to make it more and more difficult for you to put out these bigger buildings, which if we look in the deck, we've got buildings that require 5 resources. You actually have to make that little horseshoe. Or this one for the obelisk of the crescent, and this one takes 4. And then if we look at some of the other ones, this one takes 6. A lot. And so the variability is going to come in on this game in a really cool way, in that you're not going to necessarily have the same cards every time, with the exception of one, and that is that very basic little cottage. Every single game you play, you will only have this one cottage card. So of these 8, there will only be this one that is always going to be the same. It's always going to cost this little L of a brick, a glass, and a wheat to make a cottage, which is really, really nice. And then to add a little bit more asymmetric play, so asymmetric play is where you and I have different player powers or something unique to us. We take a much bigger deck of monument cards, and we will deal 2 of these to each of us, and then you get to choose one of them from your hand. So you can choose at the beginning of the game to take this one or this one if these were the 2 dealt to you. So again, I'm going to be telling you what monument card for you to take, or present you with the 2 options, and you'll choose from one of those 2 and when we do this live playthrough. So do make sure to tune back in for that, which is going to be really, really cool. Now, I talked about the complexity of this game with that age restriction, and the reason for that is because all of these cards, besides this little thing, because you might be wondering, well, how do I win the game? This will actually tell you how you generate points. So that cottage we were talking about, the cottage, 3 points if this building is what's called fed. And then you can look at the farm one, which is not surprising, it's a farm, and depending on what farm you happen to draw for the team, it can feed different things. So if you have the regular farm, it'll feed 4 buildings anywhere on your town. Or if you were to get the orchard, it'll feed all the buildings in the same row or end column as your farm. So it'll essentially make a cross anywhere on your map, like crosshairs. So it's really, really cool. Every time I've played this game, I have not had the same things come out. Scores have ranged between about middle teens to upper 30s in points for us as we've played it, and I played it at the convention. Now, some people have complained in the past about, hey, well, can it turn to what's called hate drafting, where I am just picking a resource because I know you definitely don't want it, or I assume you don't want it based on the choices that you've made. And so if that's not the kind of thing that goes well for your group, they also included this cool little deck of cards, and this is how I'm going to randomize the resources that are going to come out. Because this little deck of cards is, you shuffle it up, and it's going to tell you what resource everyone's going to get. So you can just mix this up, and when the deck runs out, shuffle it again, show a resource. This one's a brick, and everyone who is playing along will also get a brick and have to work with that. So it's really, really cool. These buildings sometimes have different powers or only score if they're put into the corners. So essentially what I like to think of it is, it's really looking at how am I going to optimize my little town, essentially like city planning, but I have other feedback coming in, and I'm not going to necessarily get the resources at the time I want them, but I might get them eventually. So Tiny Towns, you can play it as fast as 20 minutes if you know what's going on. Everybody kind of knows. But honestly, max 45 minutes, and that's even if you're playing at 6 players, because you're going to get that many resources before it comes around to you. So the more people that you have playing, if you're doing more of that, where everyone can choose the resource on their turn that they want everyone to get, then it might be a little bit more interesting because you get that more interaction. And so if you have more people, though, you will have less times where you get to author something. Because if you're playing 6 players, you'll say 1 resources, and 5 resources later, you'll get to then say that next 6th one. So Tiny Towns, really great game. MSRP is about $35, $40. So for the replayability with this game, it's pretty good value for the money. Again, my name is Bruce Brown. This is Board Game Impact. I recommend you go check out the Patreon. So Board Game Impact, it's patreon.com/BoardGameImpact, where you can learn all sorts of cool things about games I'm playing that are just for our backers, as well as articles that I'm writing about other things going on in the hobby. But also, please do subscribe to this video, as well as give us a like if this is what you liked, or a dislike, and just drop some things in the comments. What stood out to you about Tiny Towns? Is there one of these buildings that you thought was cutest? But more importantly, I just want you to go have fun and go have a positive impact on the world. Have fun.